Terraria, released in 2011 by Relogic. It's that game that looks like 2D Minecraft on the surface with the building and sandbox stuff, but then becomes way more than that not very long after playing it. It's had dozens upon dozens of updates since its release, with new stuff constantly being added. The last time I did a full playthrough was in 2021, but before that, the last time I actually even touched the game was in 2017, I think. My Steam history thing says I got this game as a gift in 2012, but I don't even remember by who, or if it was even an actual gift given to me, since I think there was a Steam event of sorts back then where people could get games for free. The very first things you do is make your character real quick. There's not much point to spending too much time here since there are various early game features you can use to re-customize your character. All characters have the same base stats, though the items you use in-game will be what says you're faster and stronger with something. After character creation, you then make a randomly generated world with its own unique world seed. If you really want, you can use someone else's seed instead. You get a choice of how big or small the world is, and I always pick large because my usual plan with Terraria is to play long term. Granted, I've only ever actually fully played this game to the end twice. Large worlds tend to feel extremely big at first, but there comes a point in the game where they start feeling puny thanks to the very convenient teleportation options that become available. There are world difficulty options to choose from on world creation, and I've only ever played on the default difficulty setting once, back when I first played it when difficulty options didn't exist yet. I've only ever done full playthroughs on Master Mode with the For the Worthy seed, a seed that further enhances the difficulty of the game. It's both incredibly rewarding and incredibly bullshit, like often putting into light the extremely shittier parts of the game. Expert and Master Mode feature some exclusive items, ranging from extremely useful to simple decorations specifically made for showing off that you played on the high difficulties. Playing on such a high difficulty level, I did abuse the Terraria wiki quite a lot, because I figured it's a good trade-off for playing on a mode where I can die in 1 to 5 hits within a short notice. Maybe it's best to abuse the wiki regardless, just because there are a billion items and mechanics and whatever in this game you probably won't ever find out otherwise. You get a choice of which type of evil biome you want in your world, Corruption or Crimson. Corruption way back was the only evil biome in the game. I've only ever picked Crimson when I got the choice because I like the gore theme, and I consider the enemies there to be harder. At some point in the game, you get to add the other evil biome into your world if you really want, without making another world and bringing that evil over to another. I go into the game, and the very first thing I or anyone should do is make a temporary base out of the dirt or wood nearby. It doesn't have to be a good base, it just needs to be enough to keep me safe from the local early game wildlife. Nighttime especially is very dangerous, because zombies and floating eyes are too much for any starting character. I also set up a 3-tile wide hole at the default spawn point, because that's where I like to have my elevator as the community calls it, which is just a straight vertical hole into the deepest part of the world. Now that I have a home of sorts, I'm settled in and feel the need to explore, look for crafting materials, treasure, whatever else good, knowing I'll have a safe spot to go back to. Most of the game will be spent digging and exploring underground, because that's what most every generated map consists of. The surface area is incredibly puny in comparison, but that's not to say the surface doesn't have some good beginning treasure either. After just enough exploring underground and acquiring some nice beginning gear, I realized that I need to make suitable houses for some early NPCs to spawn and stick around. One of the most important being the Angler, so I can get started on the fishing quests. Fishing in Terraria is incredibly rewarding because you can get high tier ores and biome-specific gear from it without the need to actually explore for them. Granted, just like fishing in any other video game, it's incredibly boring and requires great patience. To make it far less boring, I usually do something else, like watch YouTube or something on one side of the screen while I fish in Terraria on the other. And it's not like you can get everything from fishing anyway. The best ores and items still require you to actually look for them yourself, and the really good stuff you get from fishing have a pretty low acquire rate. The more quests you do for the Angler NPC though, the more fishing gear you get to make the fishing rewards come at a faster rate. On the difficulty I played at, I made absolute sure to fish as much as possible whenever it was convenient, because I just really wanted to kill things faster and not die so fast as soon as possible with how hard-hitting and tanky everything is on this difficulty. The more anyone explores, the more they'll find out how many items they have, and how little storage they have to put them in. At some point, everyone eventually makes one big storage space of some kind. Knowing how many items I'll be hoarding, I readied mine to be pretty big. It's incredibly satisfying to move from stuffing items into random chests you picked up, into storing them in specific sections. And that satisfaction arrived immediately as soon as I got my first few categorized chests ready, knowing specifically where my blocks, extra equipment, and crafting materials are stored.
Oh. You feel an evil presence watching you. What? What?
If you meet the conditions as a result of your exploring, you'll spawn a boss automatically. Or by accident. I guess it really is best to just look up guides or the wiki on how anything spawns. On the difficulty I played at, there was almost no way for me to actually be ready for random boss spawns, although they did make for some free practice. Free practice I call it because you normally have to waste items in this game just to summon bosses, and you don't get the summoning item back even after you lose. It's one of the things I absolutely hate about this game. If I wanted to practice a boss, I'd make backup copies of my save files and practice there, so that if I lose, I can just keep making backup copies and practice on those, just so I don't waste resources and time on my real save file, making boss summoning items again and again trying to get the hang of a boss fight. The summoning items for one of the first bosses are extremely abundant, thankfully, so there's at least almost no worry of farming for that one's materials. The boss fights themselves are generally pretty fun, especially on most of the higher difficulties where they have a few more attacks in their arsenal, or they're just outright faster. One of the early boss drops on there is the Cthulhu Shield, the most important item in the game for these modes. It's got the ability to let you do a quick dash that lets you ram into enemies, quickly escape from attacks, and immediately go full running speed. Even with a mount if you get on the mount immediately after a dash. On the difficulty I played at, bosses are sometimes extremely bullshit, because pretty often their idea of making a fight more difficult is just spawning additional enemies or some other retarded gimmick that can be completely removed from the equation prior to a fight. You normally have to tediously make your own boss arenas to fight them on more even ground, usually on a literal level, but that's not entirely necessary for the first few bosses, or any of them on the lower default difficulties maybe. The shit you get for beating a boss are usually extremely rewarding, so much so that you're probably going to be using them right away if you get them. Farming bosses for a specific item is almost as garbage as the idea of farming their summoning items though. Despite a 25% drop rate chance sounding pretty high, it also means a 75% chance to not get it, and you might get lucky enough to constantly be on the side of the 75%. This really applies to every enemy in the game with items you may want them to drop. On the higher difficulties where everything is tankier, that means a longer time spent farming for shit. It's that retarded RNG thing in RPGs where you don't even see progress being made, you're just hoping for whatever to drop eventually. Aside from random boss spawns, random invasion events may occur as well. One of the very early ones is the Blood Moon, which spawns the usual night enemies and some unique ones at an extremely high rate until morning comes. It's good easy early game money if you're prepared for them. Later events may be more difficult, unless you're also highly prepared for those to make them just as trivial. These events often ruin whatever plan you may have for exploring the surface, but you can cancel them as soon as the event gets announced by just quitting out of the game or staying underground before the event actually starts, so should you not actually want these to happen. The same applies with random boss spawns. You can quit out of the game or go underground to cancel their arrival if you ever see their announcements. Terraria has a lot of bullshit, for better and worse, and I can't really tell when it's intentional or not a lot of times. I know for sure though that playing smart is very rewarding when you make good use or abuse the game's mechanics to your advantage. There's even a very useful glitch of sorts that's been around since version 1.2 that they just consider a feature now. Maybe they're just saying that because they don't actually know how to fix it without breaking other shit? I don't know. That said, smart gameplay also means stuff that you can just look up guides or videos for, though they're more than often just methods to cheese something. My favorite thing to abuse are the things that can teleport you, namely the teleporter itself, which I didn't really make good use of until very late in the game. Instantly going from one part of the map to another is just about every enemy's greatest weakness, unless they have the ability to teleport to you. Aside from playing smart, there's also playing well. Just because the game can be lax doesn't mean it doesn't offer gameplay that tests your mechanical skills. Stuff normally found in 2D action games that tests your ability to dodge fast projectiles, aim your shots consistently, switching to the appropriate weapons on the fly without fumbling your button presses. They're not strictly required due to the many other alternative methods, but they're definitely there. I don't know the ratio, but I know that for a lot of people that kind of gameplay is where the real fun's at, and I'm sure it's why the bosses are as tweaked as they are within the high difficulty settings. In between my exploring and material gathering, I make and expand a storage room, and even have a whole section where I do my crafting. As soon as I felt confident in my equipped gear after the first boss, I move on to try and fight the Brain of Cthulhu boss, a boss that's unique only to the Crimson biome. That's really the entire game if you're looking to actually progress. Explore, acquire gear, and then fight new bosses when you think you're ready. All very rewarding. My home went from just being a tiny, shitty dirt house to a giant base of operations full of storage, crafting stations, and even decorations. I don't know who I'm showing off to, if I'm even showing off to anyone, but it does feel good seeing my own progress through the increasing size of my home and collections. I think half of my entire playtime with Terraria was spent on building and expanding my home. One of the final goals in the game is to go all the way down to the very bottom of the world and kill the Wall of Flesh. You technically don't even need to actually kill any boss prior to that thing. It's just highly suggested for the equipment rewards and fun. After the Wall of Flesh has been killed for the first time in the current world, you'll get a vague notification. What it actually means is that the current world has just been converted to Hardmode, unlocking new enemies, bosses, transforming parts of your world into a new biome. It's practically the other half of the game, maybe more. As the name suggests, Hardmode makes the world more challenging to deal with. However, that's where most of the fun equipment comes from. There are no character classes in Terraria, technically. There are, however, certain weapon type specific builds you can equip yourself with. Prior to Hardmode, you're really just using whatever seems good enough to fight a boss with. Upon starting Hardmode, the game right away gives you accessories that raise the damage of specific weapon categories. The new gear you can craft even encourages having specific builds. You can focus builds on melee, ranged, magic, or summons. You can switch them around on the fly thanks to the loadout system, but that's if you've also got the time to even get the gear for them. Melee builds are cool for the tankiness, but practically all of the actual good melee weapons aren't truly melee at all and rely on the projectiles or extremely long reach of some to safely do damage, because getting close to enemies in this game, especially in hard mode, is too risky to be worthwhile. In that sense, most of the only good true melee weapons are yo-yos for their long, controllable reach. Ranged weapons are just that, weapons you hit far away with, either with bows, guns, or some other fancy category that uses range damage. I can imagine ranged being a common class to use by most everyone in hard mode due to how safe you can be with them. Magic weapons are generally just very fancy ranged weapons, but it uses up your mana so you're pretty limited on uses during fights until your MP recharges. However, magic I think also has the most variety in functionality. Aside from the basic bolt shooting kind, there are magic weapons that can shoot bouncing fireballs, placeable burning walls, rain clouds, weapons that shoot out bees that are somehow considered magic, and my favorite, the defense lowering piss magic. Summoners have the potential to be the absolute strongest class, letting your minions do massive damage at a rapid rate. Such power though can only be reached near the end of the game, and you have to risk getting relatively close to enemies while being extremely fragile yourself, although I guess it's only really risky on the higher difficulty worlds. Hard mode has a more step-by-step kind of thing that's required to actually beating the game, compared to the world before that where there's just the one goal. They want you to kill bosses so that you can unlock and fight a specific boss, which upon beating will allow you to fight another boss, and then eventually you'll be able to fight the true final boss of the game. After that, Credits even roll to signify that you've officially beaten Terraria. My original intention for replaying this game recently was just to get some new achievements that became available. Not that any of them are actually very hard to get, they just either take a little time or luck. I recall being addicted to the game before, and knew I'd stick around for a while if I ever started again, which I did. I wasn't paying attention to my playtime during my recent playthrough. I just know that it took me a few weeks to go from beginning to end. I'm only just under 1,000 hours in total according to my Steam thing, but there are a lot of people that have well over that. And I wouldn't be too surprised if there were more than a dozen people or so up in the 10,000 hour region. I don't really have a good sense for architecture, so I didn't bother too much with being aesthetically pleasing structures. But Terraria has an insane amount of features dedicated to it for those that do have a good sense. A lot of my time wasn't just spent on building shit, but also thinking of what to build, constantly rebuilding what looks wrong, gathering the materials for whatever it is I'm building. It's kind of a shame that much of the really fun late game equipment was only designed for late game, because taking these items into a new world makes the whole game too easy with how much damage they do. The game also has some very unique secret world seeds that you can look up, seeds that can change how you play and explore, like the Don't Starve collaboration seed, the Bee seed, and more. The difficulty setting and For the Worthy seed I played on isn't even the hardest difficulty. I think that reputation belongs to the Get Fixed Boy seed, which combines many or all of the secret seeds into one, including the difficulty increasing For the Worthy seed. There are many other lesser popular versions of Terraria out there, like the phone version, console version, regional console version, 3DS. None of it getting the same proper treatment as the PC version though. Terraria has had loads and loads of big updates since the game came out, adding loads of quality of life features and content, all for free. They've been saying this will be our last update for several big updates already, so who actually knows when they'll stop by this point. Terraria is insanely replayable, and there are many giant-sized mods out there as well that make that replayability even more immense.